pursuing a Bachelor's of Art in Art Practice with a minor in mathematics. I want to begin by asking you all the question: what is race? Is it the hue of your skin? Is it the way your wavy hair bounces across your shoulders? Or is it your immigrant grandmother? Or your experiences as a child? Well, I want to offer a different perspective. It's just a question. In 1942, this British-American anthropologist offered the idea that race was not based on biological concepts, but rather it was a social construction. Throughout the duration of this project, I had to consider this answer and subsequently Montesquieu. When I was selected to assist in research with Dr. Evelyn Hammonds, who is a distinguished scholar and academic leader known for her history of contributions to the history of science, public health, medicine, and African American studies. And so this temporary exhibition will explore the role that science plays in race and how subsequently how tools have been used to support science in race. The collection has over 20,000 instruments dating from the 15th century to the present, and all of these instruments some of these instruments have subsequently been used to support race science. So when I was selected to curate this exhibition, I knew I was coming from a place of blackness, and I knew that I could handle the information. But I had a growing concern about how other diverse museum audiences would be able to palate this information. I mean, the data that we discovered was extremely sensitive. From census data of Native Americans who have died in tuberculosis to casts of African Americans that have been executed. So in essence, I had to ask myself, how can this exhibition appeal to these marginalized identities? How can we convey this racialized data in a way that highlights the importance of all perspectives? How can a collection at an institution rooted in slavery sensitively produce an exhibition about race? In what ways should diverse voices and audiences be incorporated into this exhibition? And how can I contribute to the everyday development of the collection? So, I came up with a couple of key objectives to answer these questions. The first one being a thought on the custody of human remains and human objects. Now, even if you're not in the museum forum, we know that this has been a hot topic as it relates to community, consent, and repatriation, but I was enlightened to this concern when I discovered this diagram. So, upon my research, I discovered this study by Joseph Taylor Johnson on the peculiarities of the partition in the Negro races. And this diagram outlines the different anatomical outlines of different pelvises. So first we have an African female, an American black female, and a white female. And I knew I wanted to display this information and the fact that they were quantifying these, anatomical measurements, but I knew I didn't want to include an actual pelvis in the exhibition. So I had to explore the question of how can I include this information in a way that was sensitive. So I did a lot of research, and there have been thousands of articles and publications that cover this topic, but one of the most noticeable of these publications is the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, which is also known as NAGPRA, which has federally enforceable laws that constitute the repatriation of human remains, especially in Native Americans that are federally recognized tribes. But I did recognize that this legislation did not assess violently acquired African American human remains. Additionally, Harvard University themselves has published documentation on this. They established the steering committee in 2022, which published the Human Remains Report, in which they detailed that it is the university's responsibility to return all ancestral remains. And they did also outline some recommendations and guidelines for objects that do not comply under NAGPRA. However, these are simply recommendations. They're very relaxed guidelines that do not have enforceable policies that can be instituted for these remains. So I sought out to do just that. After vigorous scribbling in the Science Center, shout out the Science Center, I was able to create a comprehensive 9-step growing framework that addresses when a museum accessions an object related to human remains. I'm not going to bore you guys with the details, but I do want to highlight some key concepts of this framework. The first 2 steps of this framework being recognition. So we need to recognize where exactly the object came from, how the museum acquired it, which NAGPRA likes to detail its cultural affiliation, the recognitions that the museum has to, the responsibilities that the museum has to the preservation of information value, the maker, and the visitors in the community. And a great way to hold a museum responsible for these responsibilities is to create clear mission statements. Steps 3 through 5 detail the selection of representatives, but the most important of these representatives being community representatives. So who has the voice for the community that this human domain belongs to? So then we're able to draft support and open dialogue in research, which involves an informed mutual consent and also an effective presentation of the research that belongs to the object. From this dialogue, we were able to create results of the dialogue, which includes the location of where the object should go. Once again, we're emphasizing this idea of collaborative ownership and also emphasizing the idea of repatriation. Repatriation basically means we are returning this object to the community in which it belongs to. But I do want to point out that repatriation is just one small step of this much larger ethical question. Finally, we're able to compile a comprehensive inventory, emphasizing this idea that a museum has custody but not control. We're able to craft curatorial research. So if the community gives the museum permission to have this object in their display, how are we able to effectively create an exhibition that emphasizes the sensitive data? So once again, we're emphasizing open dialogue, and some recommendations for this is creating call-outs for graphic content, language interpretation, and also the recommendation of ethical replicas. So Dr. Tracy Teslow details that we should use ethical replicas whenever possible. And finally, we have enforcement and penalties. This involves holding the institution accountable and creating a growing framework. So when I come back to this question of whether or not these pelvises should be used, I have made the conclusion that it is ethical to create a high-quality 3D replica, but if we are using standard measurements that belong to a person, it is our responsibility to go back to that person and ask for consent, ask if we can use these measurements, and thoroughly craft data and research around why we're using it. So, of course, I was able to answer this idea of theoretical objects, but I also had to constitute for numerical data. So in the 1800s, there was this fascination with the quantification of risk. There was characterization, categorization, and division that led to this reinforcement of falsified superiority. But there was a particular scholar who offered a striking alternative. Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois was a leading sociologist and historian whose primary focus was on the investigation of the African American, the state of African American, of all identities across the nation. And by doing these investigations, he was obviously counting populations, so he created a lot of census data in order to illustrate the research that he had done. So in 1900s, he was accepted to display some of this information at the American Negro Exhibition at the Exposition Universal. But he knew that there was a lack of concern and a lack of appreciation for Black sociologists at the time. So he turned to proto-modernist aesthetics such as Russian constructivism to illustrate these themes. Now these styles use bright colors and clean lines to emphasize power, vitality, and change, and really emphasize that art should be utilitarian and serve a purpose beyond decoration. So this study consists of two different series. One is considering the Georgia Negro, and the second one considering a series of statistical charts illustrating the conditions of former African slaves. There are 50 diagrams in this exhibition, and they're mounted onto pasteboard cards and mounted onto movable standards so the viewers can interact with the exhibition. This project was also extremely collaborative. Du Bois really emphasized that the viewers of the infographics should be co-producers in this sociological knowledge. These are just some more visualizations of what Du Bois was doing, pardon me. He used materials such as inks and gouache watercolors to emphasize, high contrasted colors. So he had this idea that these viewers should be co-producers of sociological knowledge. In fact, 3 of the students that assisted him with the Georgia series went to Atlanta University, which is right up the street from my home institution. So I knew that I had a personal connection with the work, and I knew that we had this shared vision of trying to emphasize data in a way that others cannot. So I attempted to integrate these things into my own work. I imitated the type of paper he used, the typeface, the inks, and the watercolors to create these high contrast, stunning visualizations. May I present to you? Du Bois visualizations. So this first visualization that I created examines the average number of sweat glands per centimeter in various races. So this study with Elroy, Clark, and Rusty Lamb, it takes sweat glands that have been exhibited in different fingers and quantifies them. So this general average, as represented by the blue bar, is not the standard American. It's rather just a general average of all of these quantifications. And in this study, they divided people up into 7 different groups. And the red bars actually compare the number of glands to the general average. And what I really want to point out with this visualization is that it really points out the absurdity of some of these scientific quantifications. How can a Negrito youth, which is a Black American or a Black Caribbean child, have significantly more sweat glands when they're a child, but then decrease in that number as they're adults? So some of this data is just really questionable, and I really wanted to emphasize and highlight that. These are just some more visualizations. These are all created by him. This second visualization that I created examined skin pigmentation. So Dr. M.J. Herkovitz used this tool called a color top, which is a spinning dreidel with rotating discs, to quantify how much pigmentation a individual possesses in their arm. So with this, they were able to create multiple ancestral classes, more white than Negro, same amount of Negro than white, more Negro than white, and just Negro. And finally, we have the evolutionary tree of human races. This is a study done in 1991 by A.M. Bocock, where she studied 14 indigenous populations from 5 different continents, each of which had 30 myosatellite loci with 4 types of genetic markers. So she was examining 4 types of genetic markers, and this is the result of one of those genetic markers. Once again, I created all these by hand. I used different adhesives and sticker paper to create the titles. These are some of the groups that she created and some of the groups that she studied. Just notice that some of this data is really outdated, and also the fact that it's not including a variety of different groups. Finally, of course, we had to support the exhibition physically. I had to give the people a show. So I was able to create a catalog of different types of instruments that are able to be used in the display. One of which includes a binocular pencil, which was sort of like a microscope, but it was used to examine different types of skin cells and skin size. We also have a gyroscope, which is similar to a tentometer with removable discs that were used to measure for example, skin pigmentation. And then we also have the spreading calipers by Dr. Montefiore. Like Jaden said, we were also able to visit a variety of different museums, such as the Warren Anatomical Museum and the Harvard Museum of Natural History, to see what objects they had in their collection. And I was also able to support the conservation process. So I was able to create a conservation box that was necessary for the staging and movement of collections. This is an electromagnetic apparatus. Now what it does, I'm not sure, but I was able to create a different type of box and test the box using ethicon cubes and make sure the object was able to be safely secured for movement. It's my little box. She's cute. All that notwithstanding, as I reflect back on this idea of what is race, what are we, I've come to this educated conclusion. America is a melting pot of lineages that have traversed the world. And our race is just a reflection of all of the accomplishments that our ancestors have achieved. And I'm called back to this quote from Kit Fulbeck's book, where a participant was asked, "What are you?" And their response was, "I'm the glowing around the moon. I'm the endless summers that you don't forget. I'm the permanent that leaves a mark. I am me." The next step for these visualizations, I am excited to announce that these data visualizations will be implemented into the Harvard exhibition in 2026. I also plan on establishing more literature that elaborates on the framework that I created and continue my scholarship on the impact of inclusive design techniques. As you can see, I had a lot of fun with my time here at the Science Center. I got to work, I had a lot of artistic practice, I got to see so many different beautiful sites and explore different museums, see quite a few interesting statues, and really get some hands-on work with some of the objects that I was dealing with, and also see some very, very, very beautiful art. I want to give my acknowledgments to Dr. Hannah Marcus, Dr. Evelyn Hammonds, and Dr. Joshua Gorman. Corbin, the entire Chizzy team and staff, as well as my team of interns, Dr. Shakara Jackson. And if you want to stay updated on this work, I encourage you to follow my portfolio, my website, where I will be posting updates. Thank you.